Hi there. Thanks for checking in to Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. Welcome to episode 87. In this episode, you're going to hear from Lindsay Titus, Tom Shimmer. You're going to hear from many others as I go through my week, getting some exercise in the morning, as you know, and I reflect on my learning. Yesterday, I listened to the Shane FAAF show, and they talk about their learning and things that they are doing in their space. Fantastic, inspiring, gets me out of bed in the morning. Well, actually, I get out of bed to come and do this, as well as to walk and get some exercise and get my son off to work on time. All right, so without further ado, hey, before you do that, subscribe, review, and share it with a friend. If you could, Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. A couple new listeners this week, you'll hear your names. All right, without further ado, episode 87, Fresh Air at 5. Here we go.
I'm Katie Atwell, co-host of the EduGals podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to Fresh Air at 5, the podcast. I'm your host, Brian Carpenter. Fresh Air at 5 is my regular attempt to exercise by walking about my neighborhood, to take in podcast content, then reflect in an unedited video, which I finally post to my Twitter channel. This podcast will be a regular collection of the audio from these selfie videos. You can follow me on Twitter at Fresh Air at 5, or check out my website, briancarpenter.com, for other content I have created and collected. Hey, PLN. Welcome to Monday, August 29, 2022. It's the last partial week of August. We're heading into September, which means that on the other side of the Labor Day weekend, on September 6th, I am back in the classroom, back in my role as a teacher, and doing all things that Carpenter does during the school year. So yes, I have a smidge of time left to eke out the last moments of summer. This morning it's 14 degrees Celsius, which is starting to feel like fall a little bit, and the temperatures are starting to drop, but that's good. It's okay. We're going to be hitting highs of 30 today, and it's going to still feel like summer later in the day, but yes, we're making that transition into the fall. This morning, one of the fall things that I like to see and do is watch the rise of Orion in the sky. And this morning I got out for Fresh Air at 5 here, and this is episode 87 that I'm recording right now. And if you're listening to this on Twitter and you're not subscribed to Fresh Air at 5, my podcast, please go to Spotify or go to Apple Podcast or even Anchor FM to see where else I've got my podcast published, and to subscribe to the podcast, because that's going to make a difference for my listenership and for yourself, because you can follow me and keep up with what Carpenter's doing. And this isn't just ramblings of Carpenter talking about his school year and things. I do talk about those things because it makes me human, but I also talk and reflect about the podcast that I listen to as I walk in the morning. So I'm out on my street in my neighborhood walking and listening to podcasts. And so yes, this morning I listened to episode 207 of the House of EdTech podcast with Chris Nesi. And Chris, thanks so much for the work that you were doing. I finally put my money where my mouth is and said that I support the podcast, and I've become an awesome supporter of the podcast through your Patreon account. So thanks for the shout out. I appreciate that. And people do the same. You know, Chris is doing a great work, and we should support him. One more thing coming right up. One more thing for August 29, 2022. I think I mentioned that Orion rises in the sky, and I got out for my walk this morning, and I got to see it. And the constellation Orion, it comes up in the eastern sky, and typically through the summer, the sun is up too early, and Orion isn't risen yet at that time of day that I'm out walking to be able to see it. So it's gone now because the sky is bright, but I was able to see it first thing when I got out just after 5 this morning. So I'm continuing my thoughts on the House of EdTech, episode 207 with Chris Nessie, as Chris brings us his EdTech thought of you got this. And you know what? As we walk into the 2022-2023 school year, you got this. You've been doing this for a bit. You got this. Yes, we feel nervous. I feel nervous a little bit as I walk in because of the anticipation of who's going to be in my class, who are, the learners, who are the takers, what's my, how am I going to interact with my colleagues? But all in all, I've got this and I feel good. So thanks, Chris, for that word of encouragement. It's really helpful as we step into the new school year. You talked on this episode of 207 with Kirsten Thompson out of Manitoba, who is a Microsoft educator. That's not what she does. She is the director of ICT in her school division, and the work that she does is with teachers and professional development to grow their understanding of how they can integrate technology. And Kirsten, thank you so much for your encouraging words. In our district, we are transitioning from Google to Microsoft, and I am going with hesitation, but I am going because we need to go. We're not required to be there for another year, but I'm stepping into it now and doing my learning that I can now to make Microsoft learning experience for my students and get them trained and learning about the Microsoft 365 platform and all things Microsoft away from Google. I'm a big Google guy. I love Google. I love the things that they do, and I need to embrace it, and I am embracing it. And Chris, thanks for having Kirsten on to talk about Microsoft. More to come. So, all right. That's all for now. Bye. The last thing for August 29, 2022, as I wrap up Fresh Air at 5, episode 87, the very first segment of that podcast that'll be coming out this coming Friday at about midnight. I want to reflect on episode 207 of the House of EdTech a little bit more. And Kirsten, thank you. Kirsten Thompson was the guest with Chris, talking about Microsoft digital equity and social media for teachers and classrooms, and the importance of that. And you said you're doing your doctoral work, Kirsten, with Dr. Alec Koros out of the University of Regina. And I have a connection with Dr. Alex Koros through the start of my Twitter account. Himself and his brother George were doing the keynote at the DL Symposium back in 2011. And as I was sitting in the audience and they were talking about social media and about using technology to leverage learning, I started my Twitter account as they were talking about Twitter right there in the room, right as they were giving their keynote. And I started passing notes in class. It was so cool. I didn't get it for about 5 years, but then now I get it. And I've been on social media and on Twitter mainly. I like it a lot. I'm personally on Facebook, not doing too much on Instagram, but I need to leverage these platforms to reach our students and families so that we can make a bigger impact with them. So that's my little connection. Congratulations on working on your doctoral work. Looking forward to hearing your results of your work when you talk to Chris in a couple of years. And finally on the show, Katrina Haynes reached out and left a voicemail for Chris about her use of Wakelet. And I'm excited, Chris, to hear more from Tisha Poncio as she comes on episode 208 with her colleague to talk about Wakelet and how we can use Wakelet in education more. I'm starting to drink it, starting to surf the wave of Wakelet. All right, that's all for it. Gotta go do Pro D today, and I'm excited about that. Peace out. Bye. Morning, PLN, August 30, 2022. It's Tuesday, and I'm out earlier today. My son has to drive a little further for work today, so I had to get him up, make sure he was out the door, and I got out the door earlier. Beautiful, beautiful. Orion was hanging in the sky for a lot longer this morning before the light started to come up. The sun, his sun rays are starting to peek over the horizon way out there in front of me, and oh my goodness, I'm excited about our day and the things that I've got to do. I'm going to learn about seesaw today and a Pro D. Yesterday, I went to a professional development about SEL strategies in the classroom with Karen Van Egmont, who's a helping teacher in our district, and she brought SEL to be meaningful. Well, it is meaningful, but I had a better understanding. I have a better understanding of it and approaches using CASTLE frameworks and 3 strategies with CASTLE. So that's news to me that I never looked at the CASTLE stuff before, and I'm excited about what I have learned. So that's a bit about me. This morning on episode 80 of the Tom Schimmer podcast that dropped yesterday, Tom brought us 3 sections, as he usually does. The Don't At Me section was about spoilers and spoiler alerts. Whoa, spoiler alert, don't say it because I haven't watched it. And Tom, I like your rules. I think that's poster worthy, and I'm going to work on a graphic about your spoiler alert rules that you came up with that we can get implemented, because I agree with you that if you haven't watched the sporting event within 48 hours, then it's open season to talk about it. Myself, I record hockey games and I record F1, and I watch those things hopefully within the first 24 hours so that I can not have to avoid Facebook and all the stuff that, where I see news, because it wrecks it for me. But not saying that Facebook, don't put anything on Facebook about sports or movies or anything like that. That's my choice. So I agree with you, Tom. Posters coming. Section 2, you talked with Lindsay Titus, and I'm going to talk about that in One More Thing coming right up. Hang on. One more thing for August 30, 2022. In the second section of the interview that Tom Schimmer had on episode 80 of the Tom Schimmer Show, Tom talks with podcaster and vice principal and Defying University coach Lindsay Titus. And Lindsay, thank you so much for being on Tom's podcast and sharing your story from the story about you with Tom, as he asked you questions about starting up the school year and about managing stress and things like that. And it was really informative and important. I really appreciate it. You are, you're inspiring to me, as is Tom, and the two of you together. What a power team. Fantastic. I really appreciated hearing from you. And people, take a listen to Lindsay's interview. If you haven't listened to her podcast, Define University with a Y-O-U in front of university, do so. But as a primer, take a listen to Tom's podcast, episode 80 here, so that you can get a sense of who Lindsay is, what she's about, and how she's doing it. One thing that stood out to me was that you talked about the balanced lifestyle, and that you won't achieve balance, but you'll achieve a blended lifestyle between the different facets of your life, and that makes up 100% of you. Sarah Johnson, in her book, Balance Like a Pirate, doesn't talk about life and work, your personal life and work, as 2 separate things. But there are 4 quadrants, and that we do ebb and flow between these 4 areas. So, yeah, that's my learning that I've done. And is it easy? No, it's not easy. But is it worth it? Yes, it is. Got to take care of myself. And also, Lindsay, you talked about teacher education programs, and we make teaching so much about student-centered, but we forget about the educator, and we need to take care of ourselves, because if we're not here, the education programs that we have won't sustain. All right, one more thing coming up. Hang on. the last thing for August 30, 2022. Continuing my reflection on episode 80. And congratulations, Tom, on 80 episodes of the Tom Schimmer Show. I think I've been listening to your show for better part of a year now, and I really enjoy what I hear, as you can obviously tell. And in this third section, you talked about assessment. Assess that with Tom and Nat, and Natalie Verabroso out of Calgary is talking with you about sustaining change and how can we sustain change as opposed to start change and continue it, and how do we know we've reached the tipping point in our organization for what that change looks like. Lots of deep thoughts and lots to chew on as we do try to implement change, not just in assessment, but in other things. Right now, where the big change for me is going on to, we're changing from Google to Microsoft. And as a point person in my school, I am working on understanding this transition so that I can bring an understanding to our staff about how we can use Microsoft compared to Google, from everything from Google Classroom and such. So the whole notion of sustaining change, yeah, we can start it, but keeping it going and having it persist beyond us, I think that's when we've really achieved the change state. And Tom, you talk about consulting and going to schools and how the schools and districts need to embrace assessment practices and have it not be dependent on you. So very important. They've hired you. You're great at what you do, but people have to start owning this stuff. If we don't own it, and if our students don't own their learning, gets back to learning. If students don't own their learning, then it doesn't matter how much we teach them if they don't own the learning. That's a sign of success as an educator. And so, yes, I'm hoping we can get to that. We will get to that. It will be difficult and challenging, but hard things do happen, and it's all good. Hey PLN, welcome to September 1, 2022. It's the first day of September in Alberta. Schools start today. Ours doesn't start till next week. I'm thankful for that. We have the weekend before us, so thankful for that. It's Thursday morning. It was plus 17 when I walked out the door this morning, and the sky you can see is starting to get light behind me, but it was pretty dark when I started. Orion was up in the sky over there, and now I can start to see the orange glow on the horizon. So yeah, it's a great morning. Enjoying my time. I want to give a shout out to a couple of new listeners to the Fresh Air at 5 podcast. And I'm not sure if they're going to hear this on Twitter. I got to find their Twitter handles. But I'm going to shout out Karina Narin, who is our school counselor. And she has recently started listening to the podcast, as well as Tracy Chris, our district vice principal of blended learning and library learning commons work that she does in our district. So thank you, ladies. Appreciate your listens, and looking forward to reconnecting with you more in the future about things you're hearing here. All right, in this episode, or this segment, I listened to episode 114 of the Che and Pav show. And Che and Pav, good morning. Good to hear your voices. And you accompanied me on my walk this morning. Thankful for you creating content and sharing that with us so that we can think, grow, and learn. You talked with Christian Phillips, a retired principal who wrote a book called For the Love of Teaching, a year in the life of a school principal. I may have got that wrong, but it's in the show notes for episode 114 of the Che and Pav show. And Kristen, thanks so much for telling your story. Thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for writing it down. And more importantly, you wrote it down and you got your story out. So people, the whole point of this is however you need to tell your story, get your story out. Kristen, I like to hear you talk about relationship and loneliness and the different facets of being a principal, and leadership is lonely. Okay, I gotta come back. I'll be right back. One sec. Continuing my thoughts on episode 114 of the Shay and Pav show, Shay and Pav talk on this episode with Kristen Phillips, an author who wrote a book about teaching for the love of teaching, a year in the life of a school principal. And she records and documents stories that have happened to her over her time as a principal and puts that into a narrative so that we can learn from it, we can read it for enjoyment, and we can also understand the value of relationships in the work that we do. Che, you made a point of having relationships for relationships' sake, period. And the other benefits that will come along with it, student engagement, more engagement in learning, things like that. Those are benefits of that, but we got to make the relationship a primary goal so that students feel valued. Having empathy with students is super important. What's the behavior about? Well, the behavior is just shouting out for some help for something. And if we squash that and quash that all the time by suspending students, yeah, there are certain things that are not acceptable. But if we go right to the suspension without any conversation and things like that, that is not helpful. All right, thank you, Kristen Phillips, for sharing with Che and Pav. And Che, I heard you get a lot out of this. That's awesome. That's fantastic. And I've gotten a lot out of it too. And so, yes, you can go check out Kristen Phillips' book on all the major booksellers and look up her name, Kristen Phillips, and you'll find her book. All right, have a fabulous day, everybody. I'm going disc golfing in a little bit and gonna go hang out with a fellow educator from town. We're gonna go spend some time on a disc golf course, and I got some prep and work to do to get ready for next Tuesday. Peace out. Happy Thursday. Bye. All right, the last thing for Thursday, September 1st, 2022. I was at a Pro D session earlier this week, and a little fun fact about the Fresh Air at 5 podcast and recording in my neighborhood is that as I was in the session, we had to go around and introduce ourselves, and I said my name, and I said I did this, and then the facilitator, our district helping teacher, Debbie Bourne, she says, "Oh yeah, I never had the heart to tell you, Brian, but every morning when you would be walking," because she lived near me, she actually lived in that house right back here, when you'd be walking in the morning and you're recording your podcast, I could hear you from my bedroom because you'd be out in the morning, we'd have our windows open, and I'd hear you talking. And so I never had the heart to tell you that before we moved, but I thought I'd share that with you now. So that's a little tidbit. I probably disturb a lot in my neighborhood as I record, but hopefully they're getting some value, and maybe they'll pick up and listen to the Fresh Air 5 podcast, So, okay, I just wanted to say that. So thanks, Debbie, for sharing that. That was awesome. That's a great little tidbit and anecdote, and will keep me mindful of my neighbors as I talk. Maybe I don't care, but I do care. But I also care about sharing what I'm thinking about, and so that's why I do this. All right, bye-bye. APLN Tuesday, September 2nd, 2022. Good morning to you. It's before 5 a.m. and I'm out here on the street. This week, I've listened to a number of different podcasts, and today I am taking in episode 119 of Gut Tech, the podcast, with Eric Geis and Nick Johnson, as they had a cross-country, a bi-coastal deep dive connection with the Check This Out guys, Brian Briggs and Ryan O'Donnell, on their episode, and they are re-airing that same episode. So this is episode 119 of Gut Tech, the podcast, and gents, it's awesome to hear you all collaborating together and sharing your goals for EdTech this year. If you haven't listened to this episode already, take a listen to it. It's fantastic and encouraging to hear that EdTech on the East Coast and EdTech on the West Coast is still going strong, and the work that they're doing is making a difference. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Making a difference for me. And like I said before, these are 4 of my favorite guys to listen to podcasts, and they're making a difference in the world. So check this out, and We Got Tech, the podcast, collab up for episode 119. You're going to hear on Gut Tech, the podcast, episode 119. Peace. Bye. One more thing for September 2, 2022. Good morning, Craig, and congratulations to you and your podcast, Ignite EdTech Podcast, on turning over 100 episodes. And today I listened to a celebration episode 100, as you reflect on how you got started and why you got started. And it's fantastic to hear after 2 years you're continuing this. I'm approaching 100 myself, and that'll happen before Christmas on the Fresh Air at 5 podcast. And I've been a guest on Ignite EdTech Podcast this past year. And thank you so much for your weekly enthusiasm for talking about EdTech and education and making a difference in students' lives. Craig, I missed the call out, so I was unfortunately not able to be a contributor to episode 100, but I support you, and you can hear me talk about Ignite EdTech Podcast on a regular basis on my podcast, Fresh Air at 5. If you haven't listened to Craig's episodes, I encourage you to subscribe to the Ignite EdTech Podcast and follow along, as he is an international educator and works with people from around the world, and has also got EduSpark going. So, fantastic, motivating, and thanks so much, Craig. Big hand clapping here from Abbotsford, BC, Canada. Peace. Bye. As my one word for 2021 is appreciate, I appreciate you giving me a listen as I've created this podcast experience for you. It's a unique Blinkist or Coles Notes version of the content I take in, like a highlight reel, so that you can hopefully find other interesting podcasts you may not have considered before. I've recorded the specific podcast episodes in the show notes for your learning convenience. Please subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming episodes. And if you enjoyed this podcast and its format, share it with someone else. Tweet about your experience or give it a review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Fresh Air at 5 can also be found on Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here, and on the Education Podcast Network, Podcasts for Educators, Podcasts by Educators. I hope you have a fantastic day and get some fresh air before the day is out, and take care of yourself, because you're worth it.